On a freezing Christmas Eve in small-town USA, a broke single mom walks into a diner with her hungry twins and only $20 to her name. She silently panics as she looks at the menu. Tears of helplessness begin to flow from her eyes. Then suddenly the door opens with a bang. 5 big wrestlers enter. Their terror instantly shocks the entire diner. Before I continue, let me know in the comments. Have you subscribed to the channel or not? And also tell me which city and country you are watching from so that I can thank you personally. Snow was falling softly from the dark winter sky. The streets of the city glowed with colorful Christmas lights. Shop windows sparkled with decorations. Cheerful music floated through the air, and families moved along the sidewalks with smiles on their faces, carrying gifts and laughing together. Everywhere there was warmth, joy, and celebration. But among all that light and happiness, a small, silent family walked unnoticed. A poor mother moved slowly through the cold night, holding the hands of her twin children. Her face was pale from exhaustion, her shoulders tired from carrying the weight of life alone. The children wore thin, worn-out jackets that did little to protect them from the freezing wind. Their small hands trembled in her grip, yet their eyes still carried innocent hope. Inside her purse, she had only $20. As she walked, her fingers kept slipping into her purse again and again, touching the folded bill as if to reassure herself that it was still there. Fear sat heavy in her chest. She knew $20 might not even be enough to properly feed her children, especially on a night like this. After walking for some time, she stopped in front of a small roadside diner. Warm light spilled out through its glass windows. Inside, she could see people sitting close together, eating, laughing, and enjoying hot meals. The sound of plates clinking and quiet chatter drifted outside into the cold. She hesitated. Then she looked down at her children. Their eyes were fixed on the diner, wide with hunger and longing. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open and led them inside. The warm air wrapped around them instantly, melting the cold from their frozen skin. But with the warmth came eyes, curious, judging eyes that briefly studied their worn clothes and tired faces. The mother lowered her gaze and guided her children toward an empty table near the wall. They sat down quietly. A waitress walked over, placed 3 menus on the table, and left without a word. The mother picked up the menu. Her eyes moved slowly over the list of food items, but her heart began to pound. Everything was expensive: burgers, pizza, steak, prices that made her throat tighten. Once again, she opened her purse and counted the money. $20. That was all. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the purse. Her mind raced with worry. If I buy food for the children, will anything be left? What if the bill is more than I expect? What if I cannot pay? She looked up at her children. They were studying the pictures on the menu with excitement, pointing at different meals, dreaming without knowing her fear. They had no idea what was running through their mother's heart. In the far corner of the diner, a group of powerfully built wrestlers sat around a large table. Their broad shoulders, thick arms, and intimidating presence made them impossible to ignore. They were laughing loudly, talking among themselves, occasionally drawing glances from other customers. One of them noticed the small family. His eyes followed the mother's nervous movements, the way she stared at the menu for too long, the way she opened and closed her purse. He noticed the children's hungry looks and their thin jackets. He said nothing, but his gaze stayed fixed on them. Back at the table, the mother quietly raised her hand and called the waitress. "We'll just take 1 soup and 1 bread," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, as if ashamed of how little she was ordering. The children looked at her in surprise. "Mom, aren't you eating?" one of them asked gently. The mother forced a smile that trembled at the edges. "I'll eat when we get home, sweetheart." But in her heart, she knew there was nothing waiting for her at home. The waitress nodded and walked away. Silence settled over the table. The children placed their hands on their laps, no longer smiling. The mother reached down and squeezed both of their hands tightly beneath the table, as if trying to transfer her strength to them while her own was slipping away. Across the diner, the wrestler in the corner continued to watch. He had seen many fights in his life, inside rings and outside them, but he had never seen a struggle as quiet and painful as this one. And in that moment, something inside him stirred, because what was about to happen next would change everything. Soft music played inside the diner, but inside the mother's heart, a storm of anxiety raged. She kept glancing at the door, then at her children. Fear tightened around her chest. What if the bill was more than $20? What if she couldn't pay? What if everyone saw her shame? A few minutes later, the waitress returned carrying a bowl of hot soup and a basket with a single piece of bread. Steam rose into the cold air. The moment the food touched the table, the children's faces lit up. They leaned forward eagerly and began to eat, their small hands moving fast, afraid the food might disappear. The mother only watched. One of the twins broke off a piece of bread and gently held it out to her. "Mom, you should eat too." She shook her head quickly and forced a smile. "I'm not hungry, sweetheart. You both eat." But her empty stomach twisted painfully with every word. Across the diner, the powerful wrestler in the corner saw everything. At first there was surprise in his eyes, then heaviness, and finally a deep, unsettling silence. His friends were laughing and joking, but he was no longer part of their world. His attention was locked on that small table. He saw how the woman did not take a single bite. He saw how she only watched her children, smiling despite the tears collecting in her eyes. He saw her quietly wiping the corner of her face when she thought no one noticed. Something old stirred inside his chest. Maybe he saw his own mother in her. Maybe he remembered nights when his family had nothing but hope. He slowly straightened in his chair. His massive hands tightened around the edge of the table. He was about to stand when one of his friends laughed and said, "Hey, what's wrong with you? The food's getting cold." The wrestler did not answer. The mother's heart started to race. The children were nearly done eating. Now the bill would come. She glanced nervously toward the counter where the cash register stood. The waitress was already walking in their direction, with a small slip of paper in her hand. Her fingers trembled. "Please, God, let it not be more than $20, she whispered silently. The children placed their spoons down. Their plates were empty. The mother instantly opened her purse again. The crumpled $20 bill rested between her shaking fingers. She held it tightly, as if it were her last lifeline. The waitress was drawing closer. Her breathing grew shallow. And then, the wrestler suddenly stood up. The sound of his heavy chair scraping against the floor cut through the quiet diner. Several people turned in surprise. His towering body rose to its full height. Each of his footsteps sent a dull echo across the tiles. His friends stared at him in confusion, unsure what he was about to do. The mother heard the noise. She lifted her head, frozen in place. Her eyes widened in fear as she saw the massive wrestler walking straight toward her table. His face was firm, unreadable. His shoulders were broad, his presence intimidating. The way he moved carried pure power. The $20 bill shook violently in her hand. The children shrank back in their seats. "Mom," one of them whispered, her small voice trembling. The wrestler came closer and closer. The entire diner fell into a heavy silence. No one knew what was about to happen. He stopped directly beside the mother's chair. Slowly, gently, he placed his large hand on her shoulder. Then he leaned down and spoke in a quiet, steady voice. The mother and both children turned in shock at the same time, and the moment they heard his words, their eyes filled with tears. The wrestler's voice was calm, deep, and gentle. "Don't worry. Tonight everything is on me." For a moment, the mother thought she had heard him wrong. She looked up slowly, her eyes wide with disbelief. The same intimidating man who moments ago had terrified the entire diner now stood beside her with something unexpected on his face. Kindness. The trembling $20 bill slipped from her fingers and fell softly onto the table. No. I can pay," she said in a shaky voice, panic and pride mixing in her chest. "These are my children. I can't." The wrestler shook his head softly and gave a small, understanding smile. "You've already carried more than enough," he said quietly. "Please, let me help." The diner went completely silent. Even the sound of forks and plates seemed to disappear. Every eye in the room was fixed on them. No one dared to speak. The wrestler gently picked up the $20 bill from the table and carefully placed it back into the mother's hand. "Keep this," he said. "This is yours. You earned it." Tears spilled from the mother's eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out, only sobs. Her hands shook as she looked down at her children. The twins stared in shock, their small faces frozen as if they were trapped inside a dream. The wrestler straightened up and turned toward the counter. His steps were still heavy, but now they carried purpose instead of fear. He walked directly to the register and faced the waitress. "I'll take care of their entire bill," he said firmly. "And whatever else the children want to eat, add that too." The waitress's eyes widened. "You mean all of it?" she asked in disbelief. The wrestler pulled out his wallet, removed several bills, and placed them flat on the counter. "Yes," he said, "and make it the best food you have." Whispers spread through the diner like wildfire. People leaned toward one another, murmuring in shock. Some shook their heads in amazement. Others lowered their eyes, ashamed that they had judged the woman moments earlier. The waitress nodded quickly and rushed toward the kitchen. At the table, the mother sat frozen. Tears streamed freely down her face now. The children looked at her, then at the wrestler, then back at each other, completely unsure what was happening. "Mom, is that man buying food for us?" one of the twins asked in a tiny voice. The mother pulled both children into her arms and held them tightly. "Yes, my loves. I think God sent us an angel tonight," she whispered through her tears. A few minutes later, the waitress returned, this time carrying a tray overflowing with food. Hot burgers, fresh pizza, crispy fries, warm milk, and slices of chocolate cake for dessert. The children's eyes lit up with pure excitement. "All of this for us?" they whispered in disbelief. The mother stared at the food with trembling hands. She looked again and again at the wrestler, struggling to accept that this was real. He stepped closer and spoke softly. "Tonight isn't just Christmas," he said. "Tonight is about hope." The mother slowly stood up. Her legs shook as she faced him. With tears pouring down her face, she joined her hands in front of her chest. "I will never forget this," she cried. "You have no idea what you have done for us." The wrestler's eyes grew wet. His voice dropped even lower. "I do know," he said quietly, "because once I was standing exactly where you are now." A hush swept through the diner. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. One by one, more hands joined in, until the entire diner echoed with applause, not for fame, not for power, but for humanity. The children laughed as they began to eat again, this time without fear. The mother watched them, her heart finally feeling lighter than it had in years. Her tears now carried gratitude instead of despair. But the story was far from over, because the reason this wrestler had stepped forward was a story of pain, loss, and survival no one in that diner yet knew. The diner was still echoing with applause, but inside the wrestler's chest, a very different noise was rising. His eyes remained on the mother and her children, but his mind had already traveled far back in time, many years into the past. He slowly returned to his table, yet he was no longer the same man who had left it. His friends watched him in silence. Their expressions changed. "Man, you really surprised us tonight," one of them said with a soft smile. The wrestler gave a faint smile in return, but deep behind it lived an old pain. He lifted his glass, took a slow sip, then exhaled. "When I saw that woman's tears," he said quietly, "I saw my own mother." The table fell silent. "We were once sitting in a diner just like this, only the ending was very different." His eyes drifted as memories pulled him under. He was a boy from a broken neighborhood, a cracked roof, water dripping through the ceiling, and a mother whose hands were always sore from cleaning other people's houses. His father had left this world long ago. His mother was his entire world, his strength and his weakness. It was a winter night, just like tonight. His mother had taken him into a small cafe. She had only a few dollars in her purse. They sat at a corner table. She kept looking at the menu, and then lowering it again. Finally, she ordered only one soup. "Mom, why aren't you eating?" he had asked, with innocent worry. She gave him the exact same weak smile that woman had given her children tonight. "I'll eat later, son." But later never came. When the bill arrived, his mother's hands had started shaking. The money wasn't enough. The waitress stared coldly. A few people laughed under their breath. His mother's eyes filled with tears as she bowed her head, apologizing again and again. And he could do nothing. He was just a weak, hungry child. That night, he saw his mother break for the first time. "That was the day I made a promise to myself," the wrestler said in a low voice, "that I would never again be weak, and I would never watch someone suffer like that in silence." His friends listened without interruption. "I learned how to fight, on the streets, in dirty gyms, inside the ring. My body grew strong. My name became known. Money came. But that scene never left my heart." He lifted his eyes again toward the mother and the children. The kids were laughing while eating cake. The woman was smiling at them, though tears still shimmered in her eyes. "When I saw her lying to her children tonight, pretending she wasn't hungry, I saw my mother's face all over again." His voice trembled. "If I had stayed silent tonight," he said, "I would have lost the right to look at myself ever again." At that moment, the mother slowly stood up from her table and walked toward him. Her steps were still hesitant, but courage had finally entered her heart. "I want to thank you," she said through tears, "but I don't even have the words." The wrestler immediately bowed his head. "Don't thank me," he said softly. "Thank your children. They are the reason you are still standing." She turned to look at her twins. Without hesitation, they ran to her and stood beside her. For a moment, the three of them stood in front of the wrestler like a complete family. "You didn't just give us food," the mother said. "You gave us dignity. You gave us hope." A single tear escaped the wrestler's eye, and in that moment he realized, for the first time in his life, he had defeated his past. But the story was not over yet, because outside, in the freezing night, a new test was waiting for all of them. The warmth of the diner, the echo of laughter, and the children's happiness faded the moment the door opened. A sharp blast of icy wind rushed inside, carrying with it something darker than the cold, an unspoken sense of danger. The mother gathered her children, helping them into their thin coats. Her hands were still shaking. She kept glancing at the wrestler, wanting to say something, but words refused to come. The children looked tired now, but peaceful for the first time that night. "I'll walk you outside," the wrestler said quietly. "The streets are empty, and it's too cold to be alone." The mother looked up at him with grateful eyes and slowly nodded. The moment they stepped outside, the wind struck their faces like needles. Snow crunched beneath their feet. The street was nearly silent, lit only by pale streetlights reflecting off the white ground. Somewhere far away, a car engine hummed weakly. The children instinctively moved closer to the wrestler. And then, from across the street, shadows shifted. 4 young men stepped forward from the darkness. Black jackets, cigarettes between their fingers, cold laughter in their throats, their eyes locked onto the small family. "Well, well," one of them sneered, taking a drag from his cigarette. "Looks like Christmas brought us some easy targets." The mother's heart slammed against her chest. She gripped her children's hands tightly. The wrestler immediately sensed the shift in the air. His shoulders squared, his eyes sharpened. The men began to walk toward them slowly. "Hey, sister," one of them called out mockingly. "Where you heading so late?" "Christmas is expensive, you know. Maybe you can spare a little money for us?" The words sounded playful, but their tone was pure threat. The mother's legs trembled. The children's faces went pale. The wrestler stepped forward, placing himself between the men and the family. "Turn around," he said calmly. But beneath his calm was solid steel. One of the young men laughed and moved closer. "Big guy thinks he's a hero," he scoffed. "You're alone, and there are 4 of us." The wrestler slowly clenched his fist. "You should be glad I'm alone," he said quietly. The moment stretched tight. Then one of the men lunged forward, trying to shove him aside. And that was the mistake. With lightning speed, the wrestler grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisted it violently, and slammed him onto the frozen pavement. Before the others could even react, a heavy punch crashed into the second man's jaw. The third stumbled backward in panic. The fourth turned and tried to run. It was over in seconds. The street fell silent again. 2 of the men lay on the ground, groaning in pain, one clutching his twisted wrist, the other bleeding from his nose. The remaining 2 stood frozen in fear, staring at the giant who now stood before them. The wrestler took one slow step closer. "If you ever touch another weak person again," he warned, his voice cold, "next time you won't walk away." The 2 men turned and ran into the darkness without looking back. The mother stood frozen, trembling, her arms wrapped tightly around her children. The kids had begun to cry silently, terrified. The wrestler turned back to them, his voice instantly softening. "It's okay now," he said gently. "No one will hurt you." The mother's strength finally gave out. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed downward in shock. Tears burst from her eyes. "If you hadn't been here," she sobbed, "I don't know what would have happened to us." The wrestler quickly stepped forward and supported her. "You're safe," he said firmly. "You're not alone tonight." At that moment, the diner door flew open behind them. The wrestler's friends rushed outside after hearing the noise. When they saw the men on the ground and the shaken family, their expressions hardened. "Is everyone okay?" one of them asked sharply. The wrestler nodded. "Yeah, the night just tried to test us." He looked back at the mother and the children. "Tonight, food wasn't the only thing I was meant to give," he said. Protection was too. The icy wind still howled through the empty street. But inside the mother's heart, something warm finally settled. For the first time in years, she felt truly safe. And she realized something powerful. This wrestler was not just a man of strength. He was a man of heart. The street slowly returned to silence. But it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the quiet that follows a storm. Snow continued to fall gently, yet inside the mother's heart, the chaos was finally beginning to settle. When the wrestler saw the children still trembling, he dropped to one knee in front of them. "There's nothing to be scared of anymore," he said softly. "You just met some boys who forgot how to behave." The children nodded weakly, still shaken but trying to be brave. The mother wiped her tears and forced herself to stand steady. I can never repay what you've done," she said in a broken voice. "If you hadn't been there tonight, I don't think I could have protected my children." The wrestler shook his head immediately. "You already are protecting them," he said firmly. "You've raised them alone this far. That takes more strength than most people will ever know." Something shifted in the mother's eyes at those words, something she hadn't felt in years. The wrestler's friends stepped closer. One of them quietly removed his jacket and wrapped it around the children to warm them. Another handed the mother a bottle of water. "Where do you live?" the wrestler asked gently. The mother lowered her eyes. "To tell the truth, we don't really have a proper home right now. We're staying in a single rented room. I'm behind on rent. I clean houses during the day, but work has been scarce this month." Hearing this, the same old ache tightened in the wrestler's chest. He fell silent for several seconds. Then he took a deep breath and spoke with calm certainty. "I'm not sending you back there tonight." The mother looked up in shock. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said firmly but kindly, "you and your children will spend tonight somewhere safe, under my protection. I have a secure place outside the city. No one will bother you there, just for tonight. And tomorrow we'll fix everything properly." Fear and hope collided inside her heart. "I don't want to be a burden on anyone," she whispered. The wrestler shook his head. "A mother is never a burden." The children looked up at their mom. "Mom, can we go with Uncle?" one of them asked softly. "It'll be warm there, right?" The mother's eyes filled again. She knew she had no better choice left. "All right," she whispered. "Just for tonight." Relief crossed the wrestler's face. Minutes later, they reached his vehicle, a large, powerful SUV with warm air blasting inside. The children climbed into the back seat. The mother sat quietly beside them. The wrestler took the driver's seat and started the engine. As the car moved through the snowy streets, the children slowly drifted into sleep. For the first time in a long while, their faces looked peaceful. The mother watched them silently, tears slipping down her cheeks. Tears of relief. The wrestler saw their reflection in the rearview mirror. "From tomorrow on," he said quietly, "things will change." The mother hesitated before speaking. What are you planning to do?" The wrestler kept his eyes on the road. "I want you to stop worrying about survival," he said. "I'll help you find safe work. I'll make sure your children have school, a real home, stability, not as charity, but as respect." Her breath caught. "But why?" she asked. He paused before answering. "Because no one did this for me," he said. "And I won't allow your children to grow up seeing what I saw." The car came to a stop in front of a tall, guarded building. Warm lights glowed from every window. Security stood at the entrance. "For tonight you rest here," the wrestler said. "You're not guests. You're safe." As the mother stepped out of the car with her children, she looked up at the falling snow. The cold was still there. But for the first time in years, warmth filled her heart. She finally understood. Tonight it wasn't just danger that had passed. Her entire future, and her children's future, had quietly changed direction. The night passed quietly. Inside the tall building, the room was warm, clean, and peaceful. Soft beds, thick blankets, a silence that carried comfort instead of fear. The twins slept deeply, their faces finally relaxed, carrying gentle smiles that had been missing for far too long. The mother sat in a chair beside them, watching every breath they took. Tears filled her eyes, but for the first time, these were not tears of pain. They were tears of gratitude. Morning light slowly entered through the window. When the children opened their eyes, they looked around in confusion. "Mom, where are we? Is this a dream?" The mother pulled them close and kissed their foreheads. "No, my babies," she whispered. "This isn't a dream, this is a blessing." A soft knock came at the door. The wrestler stepped inside, carrying warm milk, breakfast trays, and brand new winter clothes for the children. "Merry Christmas," he said gently. The children gasped in excitement and jumped out of bed. Laughter filled the room for the first time in a very long while. As they ate their breakfast, their smiles grew wider. The mother stood quietly in the corner, watching it all unfold like a miracle she was afraid to blink at. After breakfast, the wrestler asked the mother to step aside with him. "Today, some decisions will be made," he said calmly. "I've already spoken to a school. Starting Monday, your children will go there. And I found a work center in the city where you can begin a respectful job. A home has also been arranged." Her hands began to shake. "All of this, is it real?" she whispered. He nodded. "Yes, and it's permanent." The mother covered her face with trembling hands as her knees almost gave out. "Oh God," she cried softly. "I only ever asked for food for my children. I never imagined you would give us a future." A few hours later, they stood in front of a small but clean house. Fresh paint, warm rooms, simple furniture, everything they had been missing. The children ran inside laughing, opening doors, touching walls, jumping onto the bed. "Mom, is this really our house?" "Yes, my loves. This is our home." Her tears would not stop. As evening approached, the wrestler prepared to leave. The children ran to him and hugged his legs tightly. "Uncle, will you come again tomorrow?" one of them asked. He knelt down to their level. "I'll always be around," he said. "You're not alone anymore." The mother stepped forward. 1,000 words lived in her heart, but they all became one sentence. "You didn't just save us. You gave us a new life." The wrestler smiled softly. "No," he replied. "You gave me my lost humanity back." Then he walked away. The mother stood at the door long after he disappeared into the falling snow. The cold was still there, but it no longer touched her heart. The darkest night of her life had turned into the brightest morning. Years later. The twins walked to school in clean uniforms, laughing like ordinary children. The mother held a steady, honorable job. Their small home was filled with light, noise, and life. One afternoon, a wrestling match played on the television. Inside the ring stood the same powerful man. But to that mother and her children, he was no longer just a champion in the ring. He was their protector, their miracle, their family. The mother looked at the screen, pride shining in her eyes. "Children, that's the man who pulled us out of darkness." The twins smiled at each other. Sometimes, one small decision, one moment of kindness, one brave step forward can change an entire destiny. And that wrestler, on that cold Christmas night, did not just pay a bill. He rebuilt 3 broken lives. If this story touched your heart even a little, don't forget to like the video. It truly helps us grow. Subscribe for more real-life emotional stories that restore faith in humanity. And comment your feelings below. Your words might inspire someone who is struggling right now. Remember, one act of kindness can change a lifetime. See you in the next story.